Good afternoon. Welcome to Burning Issues. Burning Issues is a contemporary current affairs program that we do every week on ITV to talk about several of the burning issues that are affecting our citizens in Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, we can't deal with everything. We can only deal with some things. We only have an hour, and in fact, some of those topics too could take us an entire hour if we only deal with one topic. But we try to talk and touch as many issues as we possibly can. But before we get into the conversation on what's burning this week, or what are the issues that we would like to focus on what's burning this week, what have been the issues for the last week? Well, unfortunately, the sad story is simply that that 2-year-old child who went missing was found not alive this morning. And it is unfortunate that the child was found in the river, but I suppose that was to be expected. But that brings us to a really big question. It brings us to a big question. Where is community? Where is our community spirit? I mean, somebody reported that they saw a child walking out on the roadway with her pampers barefooted, her pampers alone. And nobody saw it fit to kind of hold the child and detain the child and then find out whose child it is. They allowed the child to go without an adult, a 2-year-old. I mean, tells us something is wrong with our society. But then again, too, of course, a lot of people will tell you, well, we have fears of everything now, you know. Because had we detained the child, somebody might accuse us of violating the child or anything else. So you have all of those fears. But again, that tells us something about our society. And it tells us something about our society when we hear, for instance, that we are having again 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 murders on a daily basis. I mean, yesterday was a good day for us. We only had 2 murders. It was a good day. Because last night, for instance, between last night and today, we've already had 4. And one could ask, where will it end? Will it end? Do we have confidence in our national security personnel, or starting with the minister, starting with the head of the National Security Council, coming down to the minister, coming down to the commissioner of police and all the security forces in the country? Do we have confidence in them? And those are some of the real issues that we have to talk about. I mean, where we see every day there's that whole issue of school violence. We have become a violent society. But it's not only the children who are fighting. I mean, recently I saw videos of adults going at each other in one of the supermarkets. And then there was a video about 2 nights ago or 3 nights ago where some citizens were trying to hold back a young man from going into an premises, and they were unable to hold him back, and next thing you heard was bullets being fired. Now, clearly we've become so violent that even you can't hold, the old saying in Trinidad, hold me back, hold me back. Well, definitely we can't hold back nobody. And we're not holding people back. And people are, so we have that whole issue with murders. And if murders was not enough, then there's the whole issue of all the other types of crime. Robberies. It's on the rise, you know. We haven't been getting the statistics out of it. But I mean, just 2 days ago, I saw a fellow running down the road with a 6-pack of beer. And somebody was running behind him, and they say he just snatched it from by the supermarket and run out to the supermarket with it. So, and we're going to have, in Guyana they call it snatch and grab. Is that something that we're going to have to prepare for? Particularly so when our economy now is on the downswing. And we have to talk a little bit about the economy, because next week we understand that the Minister of Finance is bringing the midterm budget. And we are lucky back to have Dr. Gokul back in the studio with us. So we'll ask her the hard economic questions. When is the next rise in price of gas? But all right, we're going to when we get to the conversation, we'll ask that question. For the time being, however, we have those kinds of burning issues. And then too, as we talk about the society and the crime and everything else, it cannot escape us. It cannot escape us of the intolerance and disrespect of members of our society. So we heard, for instance, over the weekend of the events that happened in the Karapo Hindu temple, where people broke in, stole the costume jewelry that was on the murtis, as well as cooked beef. Where we are today, in fact, in the studio here, this building was firebombed, was it 2 years ago, I think it was? And because this building also has some murtis, and the murtis were set ablaze in front. So we know that there's this type of intolerance, and we have to ask ourselves the question, what has happened to our society? We are into 60 years of independence this year. In 1962, Dr. Eric Williams gave us the watchwords of discipline, production, and tolerance. Well, clearly, ask ourselves the question, how many of those three watchwords do we really abide with? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break now and come back with the conversations with Dr. Bolan and Dr. Bahal when we talk about the burning issues in Trinidad and Tobago. We take a break now. In Trinidad and Tobago, every week there's another issue. Another issue comes to the fore, which is a burning issue for citizens. And on IETV, we will be discussing some of these burning issues from a political point of view, from a social point of view. And then my co-host will also discuss the economic and the medical. Welcome to Burning Issues on IETV, and we will also invite you to participate in the discussions with us.
The economy impacts all of us. Join us weekly as we and our guests ventilate these burning issues.
Stay tuned for informative and exciting stuff.
Welcome back to Burning Issues. And like I said, we have many burning issues today, and we want to start talking about one of the burning issues as relates to the Water and Sewerage Authority, WASA. I throw it open to my colleagues, Dr. Bahal and Dr. Gokul Boslan.
Right.
I said Bolan, it's Boslan.
You know, Dr. Raghunath, we want to start with what is printed in the press today. In the Express, there's a question on page 9 which reads, do you think that WASA can ever become a properly functioning self-sufficient entity? And you know, all of us are very aware of the inefficiencies of WASA, with some communities getting water 1 day a week, with protests over water, with leaking pipes, with infrastructure that's aged. But it comes down to public policy regarding statutory boards and by extension, state enterprises. So I want us to, even before we get to ventilating some of the challenges, because we all know what the challenges are, it's important for us to talk about the bigger public policy issues as to whether or not, in general, our statutory boards and our state enterprises are functioning well and are functioning up to the standard of an economy and a country that is in 2022, and whether or not there is need to shed some of these responsibilities as a state, put it into the hands of a a quasi-private sector body that has, of course, more efficiencies. You know, Dr. Bahal and I were talking about the 3M strategy before the show, being able to manage effectively, being able to measure what your benchmarks are, what your performance indicators are, and monitor it in a way that is efficient, where you have that loop of continuous improvements. You know, going back to this question of WASA, we, in the Parliament, the Joint Select Committee, or one of those public accounts committees, indicated that, and it's on public record, that our workforce in WASA is higher than what is deemed as efficient. That's something that we need to look at. And then in the context of having a workforce, for example, and that's just one of the issues that flows into the inefficiencies. Why is it that you still have under productivity? Why is it that you still have many of these challenges in the delivery of service? So I think it comes down to, in all cases, what's your structure of governance? And you know, we continually beat that horse on this show, but it's more than just saying challenges, but looking at the system that results in some of the perpetuation of these challenges.
I want to just step back a little bit for what you're saying, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Now, water is a serious business. We want to speak about how we can ensure that water for all through that proper governance structure. But I want to emphasize that if a country cannot get its water distribution properly, how can it survive? The physiological needs of all man, according to Maslow's theory, is air, that's free all over the country, except if there's pollution. Water, food, and shelter. So food is under the Maslow's hierarchy. That basic necessity is we have to give it. We have to ensure that the population at large have it. So there should be no excuse whatsoever, especially the light when WASA takes the responsibility, just like the children's home, that I am the sole provider of water in this country.
Yeah.
I am the sole provider, and nobody has the right to take water from anywhere, whether it's a ravine or a reservoir, and give it to somebody who, even though they might be starving or might be in serious thirst, because they have taken the responsibility. I am the sole provider, they bump the chest, WASA, Water and Sewage Authority. Were you telling me
after 60 years of independence,
you telling me now that you are frustrated? Look at these things. He said, oh, this is a report that comes from WASA. No, I'm going on the background that water is a physiological need. If you don't have water for a day or 2 days, you could die. He said WASA has not increased its water production capacity over the last 30 years, even though there had been massive residential growth during this time. So what kind of foolishness is that? He went on further to state, I'm not talking about the governance party, we want to see where the problems are. Almost every plant is producing water at 50% below capacity. I mean, for heaven's sake, man, if you're producing less than what is required, what you could do, sometimes it'll be fundamentally wrong. Where the wrongs are is a different story. We will come to that. But I want to just put on the table here that we have to be able to deal with this, not because it's like a commodity like a car or a house. It is a basic necessity. And anytime a government takes that responsibility, they should be held seriously accountable. I don't want to know if you have plenty of people doing nothing. I don't want to know if managers can't perform. I don't want to know if you are square peg in wrong hole. This is a basic necessity. So therefore, WASA has to put its house in order. Don't tell me that you're going to depend on another organizer of the desal plant who supplies 45 million gallons of barrel of water per day. And when they have a problem with maintenance, the whole place is in chaos.
So all right. So we get the point that WASA has not been doing what it is required to do. As the
But I want to emphasize, even in light, that water is a necessity.
Yeah, but as the sole provider
Yeah.
of potable water in Trinidad and Tobago, WASA has not been able to do that effectively, one. Two, that they have not done anything considering that we have a growing population and there's growing demand. And three, that they have not been able to deal with the inefficiencies
Inherent. Yeah.
in the organizational structure. Now, when we look at all of these issues, we could ask ourselves why, and in fact.
But before we go to the why yet,
yeah.
The problem is even more than that. Though. According to the reports, in the same Joint Select Committee, 34% of this population, 34% have 24/7 water supply. And it could be even less because sometimes there could be outages of electricity and whatnot. 34% is extremely small, that's 1/3. So, I mean, we have agreed then that this problem is serious, really serious.
But more than that, and this is one of the things that I also want to touch on as well. This little survey that was done by the Express indicates that 80% of the respondents in Trinidad indicate that they do not think that WASA can ever become a properly functioning, self-sufficient entity.
No, that is not scientific.
No, and while I understand that that's not scientific, it tells you something about it tells you something about something that's endemic. Okay, it isn't working. There isn't any or demonstrated strategy to improve it, so therefore we continue to expect that it will not work and it will not improve. And I think that is one of the things that is a sad reality, because it extends not only to the way that WASA operates, but many other parts of our utilities, many other parts of our bureaucratic system.
Okay, all right. So let me stick a pin in that, because one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to come back and simply say we bashing the public service all the time,
right?
And public sector, okay? But having said that, let's go back, and I would not necessarily agree with Dr. Bahal when he said that that's not scientific, because in politics and in political science, perception is reality. And for us, it's a reality that WASA is not functioning.
So 80% of the 511 respondents.
We have to agree to disagree there.
Right. So that is one of the aspects that we have to be concerned about. But herein is the real big issue. And the real big issue here is simply one which says, when we look at WASA, why has WASA ended up the way it has been? WASA has always been a challenge in state management. We have to ask a question, and they have always been the complaint that they've been overstaffed and inefficient and all sorts of things. And all of that, I mean, we have to give it as a given.
Correct.
It's correct. But we also know that there's a lot of political interference in WASA.
Right.
That we also have to deal with. And we also have to bear in mind that at the rate at which WASA, like many other state enterprises, is selling their product.
Right. Correct.
It is
below market price, which is one of the things that I wanted to touch on as well.
So we have to bear all of these things in mind. So we can't just simply just throw WASA out and say they're not functioning. But having said all of that, herein lies the problem. We've tried many a time to restructure WASA. I will tell you definitely, I know for a fact, because in fact I worked on it in the 1992-1993 period. 1991, 1992, when we did the Black and Vish consultants were down here in WASA, and they actually retrenched a certain amount of people and so on, supposedly
about
to
half,
reduce the size of WASA. And after they retrenched them, a few years later, we back to that. That was the same thing with Petrotrin. And we recall that when Petrotrin was closing down, Nobody could have given us a direct figure as to exactly how many workers were going to be laid off.
Right.
They started off by saying 2,700.
Right, and
Then they
it
went to
up to
3,400.
and 50 something.
Then we
100,
went to 50 something. Then we went to 6,000 plus,
Yeah.
close to 7,000. How many people were already affected? And that was because our human resource management systems in these organizations are not human resource management, but rather political management, in that people are employed politically.
Patronage, yeah.
Yeah, but if they're employed politically, I mean, if they satisfy certain basic requirement in terms of their job spec, they could perform.
No, but that
I
is
think the
assuming
problem-
that there is a position for them to perform.
So you tell me there are a lot of dead weight
if
in
you just
Wassa?
send in somebody into WASA because I am minister, and I say, and you come to me and say, but I want a job. I say, all right, take this letter, go to WASA, and they'll find a job for you.
So there are plenty of dead weight people in this.
Exactly, and that is where we have to look at where we go in. When we look at our state enterprises, that is seriously a problem.
So how do you get rid of the dead weight people?
Well, now, and this is where Dr. Boslan was making sure about telling us, we have to, when she read the first thing, she said, do we need to put this in private hands? Do we need to use...
But we need to come back to reevaluate, Dr. Raghunath, because you touched on a very important point just now, in the sense that we need to understand the importance of both the utility that provides water as a basic need within the context of Trinidad and Tobago, and also because when WASA was set up, it had both a development purpose and less of a commercial purpose. And that's understandable in an economy or in a country that's young. So some of these functions that were initially picked up by the government had a strong development requirement or a strong development aspect. And it also is similar to what happened in the Petrotrin case, because that had a strong employment, maintaining the integrity of the local energy sector because of the closure of the various energy firms that were exiting. So I'm not going to touch on Petrotrin just yet, but really recalling what is the primary purpose, or what was the primary purpose of the utility of WASA. So now, as we look at Trinidad in 2022, it must come back to, again, what is the purpose of the organization, and therefore to adjust. Yes, there is still a very strong development impact, an aspect, because if we can't get some of those basic needs satisfied, then it makes no sense spinning top in mud to talk about a knowledge-based economy and a digital economy when our basic needs aren't taken care of. So I take that.
Development impact should not be against an efficiency part.
And I agree.
So even though it's developmental and you may absorb some of the cost, the efficiency must be the underlying motive.
Correct. And I agree with that. And therefore, when you face a system where rates haven't been changed for X number of years, or the rate that we pay is nowhere near to market price that allows the company to even practice some of those private sector principles, then therein lies the problem. The juxtaposition of both the development and the commercial requirements for a company like that.
I mean,
just let me finish. Just looking at WASA, and I agree that we can't come and bash the public sector. That's not what we're doing, because we need to look at these state enterprises and statutory boards through a different lens. Although efficiency, yes, but other things other than efficiency.
What are the specifics to make it more productive or more efficient, more development? What are the specifics? I am suggesting, just like in many of outcome oriented, because if you have a group of 25 people in this little unit, and I send you all in trees to work to connect, to make connections, I can know at the end of the month which batch is not performing and which batch is performing. And on that basis, an outcome-oriented system for connection, I can say, well, look, if you bring in so many connections per month and you bring in zero, I'm going to get rid of you because you come in a nuisance to the organization.
And you see,
So-
this is where we have the challenge, and this is where you have the developmental aspect,
Correct.
as well as the
Commercial, yeah.
You see, and you raise that because okay, so Rebecca here is an economist. I'm a political scientist, and so I will talk about it. She'll talk about it from developmental economics. I'll talk from development administration. And development administration rigs would tell us that we needed to develop administrative structures to administer for development as well as to develop the administration. That's development administration. And that's what WASA, and not only WASA, but
Correct.
all other institutions were supposed to do. So I mean, as she was talking there, the thought that crossed my mind. For instance, what is the role of the University of the West Indies?
Correct.
Is it developmental? But now we're going to charge students, and will that undermine the developmental
No,
impact?
But Dr. Raghunath-
I'm talking about the workers who working.
Right.
I'm not talking about the charge of the customer who you want to help.
But
if the
but
worker is not performing,
you are also developing by creating employment.
no,
Right.
no, that is not creating. That's like a tomato in a bowl of other tomato that are rotten and encouraging and making others rotten in the process. You have to get rid of the rotten apple or the rotten tomato. You cannot have people who sitting there who not performing. You cannot work that way.
Right.
So even though you are developmental and you want to create employment, get them a stipend to go and do nothing home. Don't come in the organization to kind of corrupt other people. Look, and that's what I encourage you. Look at the headline: bribes and backlogs plague WASA. Because you have nothing to do, you start to create avenues to kind of collect more. I don't know the exact story, but I am telling you, unless we don't change the operation, we could still be developmental according to Rebecca. We can be, but at least let the workers perform. Who not performing, leave the organization. If they don't want to live in peace and they want to march up the place, give them a stipend to say, okay, go home. Just like the public service who are not working now, who cannot perform, but if you stay there, the rotten tomato, the rotten apple would make others rotten faster. We can't have that happening.
And I concur that is indeed correct in a utopic society.
No,
But
that's
no.
the only way to get out of it.
You see, this is
But-
a medical doctor, right?
Right.
So that's why he just cut out
He's
the
be
appendix and
clinical,
take away
right.
because you don't need it.
No, but you're correct. If you leave that there, the whole body going to get toxic.
And exactly so. But and now we are facing a huge issue with that toxicity in many arms. So I just want to go back because I actually really like this conversation on what did you call it? The administration
Of development
and
the
development
of administration.
right, and that's where I think that point on human resource in Trinidad and Tobago and managing our human resource in Trinidad and Tobago, especially in our state boards and statutory boards, state enterprises and statutory boards, must be lodged, because the development of administration does not mean hiring more people. The development of administration doesn't mean piling on more and more persons or dissecting responsibilities in such a way or without the proper monitoring and evaluation loop, which is missing. So that conversation on the development of administration, that conversation on the administration of development must happen in tandem with each other in order to ensure that your organization grows.
But in any event, WASA has always been developmental by trying to help the poor. They have subsidized WASA by billions. And I don't feel the issue is really whether the developmental administration or trying to administer a developmental way. I don't think so. I think the problem really in WASA, nobody has the power, nobody feels that passion to be able to make the changes that they see could be made. They don't have that.
But they have no incentive to do that either.
No, they have incentive, but when you go in there, as you just rightly said, the whole place looks toxic. You don't know where to start. But I'm giving you a simple way to start. Use the outcomes-oriented model, because we know everybody has to get water. And let each person show me what to do. If you can't show me, then you're not fit to be there, including the manager, including the CEO. They have changed 2 CEOs in the last couple of years. Poor guy, this minister, he reached a point where he said, look, he's frustrated. He talking just like me. And he's the minister. He said he's frustrated in the system because he can't do anything about it, and he's the minister. So he's like another WASA customer frustrated about the health system.
Well, you see,
about the WASA.
So remember I said I worked on the Black and Vish thing. And this is something that I would say that goes back to 1992, when I was doing that study on WASA. And in fact, I remember going into WASA to ask for a particular piece of information. And the gentleman the officer who I went to came to me and said, this is the information you want. You know, and it was a nice little, like a booklet.
Right.
And he fanned it in my face and says, you're not getting it.
What? And
I said, why am I not getting it? He says, because as far as I'm concerned, this has confidential information and you're not getting it. Although I was working then for the United Nations, which was contracted to do that project by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And so I said, okay, fine. So I went back to my offices at the UN ECLAC and I told my supervisors. And they said, okay, fine. We have to go to the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Public Utilities. So we went to them. I went and I spoke to the PS. And the PS says, okay, fine, I'll call them. And nothing happened. Nothing happened.
Right.
And then my immediate supervisor, who was not a Trinidadian, said, you know, where I live in close proximity to the person who I believe is the chairman of WASA's board. So let me call him and talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
Called him and spoke to him.
You got the document?
Nothing happened.
Oh.
Nothing happened. And I went back into the office and I told the guy, I says, well, you know, they're talking to the PS, they're talking to the chairman of the board. He said, let me tell you something. They could talk to who they want. Yeah, getting it. Yeah, getting it. Yeah, getting it. End that story. And that was the end of it. Well, it wasn't
because
the
they
end
have no repercussions
because
to
there
not
was no
correct.
repercussions.
Yep.
And that wasn't the end of the story. I mean, I got the information that I wanted. Surreptitiously.
Do we need to know how?
So I wouldn't tell you. All right, but I'm a researcher.
Of course
so
you
I have
are.
to find my ways to do my
Yeah,
research.
yeah.
Right?
No comment.
And we will not go into how I actually got it. But this was not the only organization I ran into that problem.
Right.
When I was doing my PhD in the Arima Borough Corporation, I went in there and the CEO wasn't there on a particular day. And I went to the deputy CEO and she said, well, fine, go ahead and go and get it. And this is me walking with letters from the permanent secretary and everybody else from the ministry saying I had access to all the information.
Yeah.
And I went to the clerk and the clerk told me,
It doesn't work like that. Yeah.
I said, the deputy CEO, who is acting CEO today, says, it don't work so. I just only take orders from the CEO. End of story. Yeah, guy, nothing. Leave. And that was the end of that.
Yeah.
But the point about it here is simply one, which says we now have to deal with WASA head on. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is whether or not we have the fortitude, those in power have the fortitude to deal with WASA. Now, when the Prime Minister appointed Minister Gonzalez, he says, I'm putting somebody who have absolutely no connection with WASA, no history with WASA, to clean up WASA. Minister Gonzalez is now saying, I'm becoming frustrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, there are many ways in which you could deal with something and get around this, just how you got around getting these documents. the model in which you could improve productivity, of course, you could increase inputs, you could increase processes, improve the efficiency of processes, and finally look at the outcomes to be able to move things forward. So you could try to increase inputs may not be the answer. We have tried that in WASA. Trying to improve processes may be a part of the solution. But if you let the output talk for themselves. So I'm not saying that's the only method, but you have to keep trying different things to be able to increase productivity. Of course, the human aspect is very important. And sometimes as a CEO, and your portfolio is very much tied to the chairman, who is tied to the cabinet and whatnot. But there's still ways, because all of us want everybody to get water. So you could find ways to get over these hurdles in terms of staffing, in terms of operation processes, in terms of different things. The politics will play a part, but I think more important is that we're not being efficient in the processes that we have to deliver that thing.
But there's one other thing that I want us to consider as well. To what extent is accountability matched with responsibility and power to make changes? So we're talking about the processes, etc. And I asked the question, so this CEO now has to navigate industrial relations, now has to navigate dealing with the trade union, now has to navigate employees with permanence as compared to employees with contracts, now has to navigate this slew of issues, but
he took the job, you know.
And he took the job. Has responsibility, is accountable, but does not have the powers.
No, he has the power, but sometimes he fails to use it.
No, well, I think her question here is sometimes, does he really have the power? And
that's it.
But if you don't have the power, you have to be prepared to say, look, I have potentially the power, but I can't use it.
Because it comes down to the board, and it comes down to the parliament and the decisions of the cabinet.
Now herein comes the challenge.
If the food comes in there, because you don't want to leave.
How many people? So when Mr. Seeley, for instance, said, look, take all the job. I don't want it. Because my hands are tied, I cannot do whatever, you know. So when Dr. Lennox Seeley, and Dr. Seeley taught with me in the Department of Political Science at UWI at one point in time. He said, take your job, I don't want it. And that is an issue we have to ask, how many of people in Trinidad and Tobago have the integrity and the character to say, take your job. If you don't want me to do the job, I ain't going to do it, right? So for instance...
But he must speak out clearly to the public. Don't take this, don't just say, I'll leave the job because I don't like what's happening there. It's too much all muddled up, and give some kind of every fairy tale.
Well, you have to be careful too. You have to understand, you have to live in the politics.
Yeah, but you have nothing to, if you want to leave your job, say, look, I'm leaving my job because I'm not getting the proper resources. I'm not able to, the workers under me not listening to me, they're taking instruction directly from the minister, and say so and then leave.
Right. So, all right. So before we end on the WASA matter today, and we're going to have to move on. So before we end on the WASA matter today, we know also that this morning in WASA, somebody went in WASA compound and shot a worker. All right. So the crime issue is there. No. So we're going to come back and talk. We're going to take a break now and come back and talk a little bit about where we are in Trinidad and Tobago on this whole issue of crime.
Yes.
We take a break now. In Trinidad and Tobago, every week there's another issue. Another issue comes to the fore, which is a burning issue for citizens. And on IETV, we will be discussing some of these burning issues from a political point of view, from a social point of view. And then my co-host will also discuss the economic and the medical. Welcome to Burning Issues on IETV. And we will also invite you to participate in the discussions with us.
The economy impacts all of us. Join us weekly as we and our guests ventilate these burning issues.
Stay tuned for informative and exciting stuff.
Welcome back to Burning Issues. Well, for all intents and purposes, as I said before the break, while we were talking about WASA, we also had to be wary of the realities of our society. And this morning, for instance, about 7:30 this morning, employee of WASA went to work this morning, and in came a car, drove past the security, went up to where the gentleman was, shot him, and exited WASA. Crime. We are into this situation. Like I said last night, overnight, we had 4 murders. And it is now becoming literally, I mean, the minister said it's mind-blowing, horrendous. Those are the words of the minister yesterday. But it is out of control. And it is a traumatic situation for many people in the society. Business people feel that they are now targets. All the chambers have come out and raised their voices and says they are targets. And are they getting the kind of support and security that we need? Citizens, I am not sure as they walk down the street whether they feel safe or not. In fact, most recently, somebody actually had to wrote me and told me that here she was walking with her dog and her nephew one evening, bright daylight, and saw this car pull up, ready to supposedly attack and pounce on them. Fortunately, her neighbor's gateway was open, and she ran into her neighbor's yard and achieved some sort of security. But the point about it here, we are all seemingly targets.
Yeah.
And crime.
It's a sad reality, but it's something that the average citizen, I believe, lives with on a daily basis. I have seen, for example, over the last year in particular, the number of requests, and this is just in my home, the number of requests over the course of the day. My husband calls, where are you? What time you'll be home? Just checking in. My car has GPS, my phone has GPS, and while you
she got me worried now because she was on quarantine, and her husband is still checking up on her, right?
Yes.
I wonder why.
Yeah,
okay.
My wearable technology knows where I am at all times, and it comes down to safety and security. The average citizen does not feel safe walking down the road, does not feel safe. Sometimes even in their own home, we all would have seen the clips of bandits, home invasions, persons scaling your fence on camera, and there is no clearly no thought of what that can possibly do. But and of course, if left unchecked, that melee of crime can impact on growth long term, can impact on the business people are already feeling impacted. And what are they going to do? They're going to insulate themselves. They're going to say, well, I will not expand, I will not invest, I will take my business elsewhere. And you are going to see private citizens as well increasingly do the same.
So we're going to get the brain drain and migration.
More than we already have?
Yes.
Question mark? More than we already have. But it's a deep social issue that has, again, like every other thing, it's very toxic, and it has infiltrated every part of our society and every part of our economy. And I just want to reflect on the example that you started this show with, where that neighbor who saw a wandering baby and did nothing. I mean, I don't know the details, but to me, where you have an adult seeing a wandering kid and saying, well, I will not I will choose not to get involved because these can be the repercussions, this can be a trap, this can be any number of things, results in that breakdown of social capital and that community that you talk about. And you see it even with neighbors never knowing who they're living next to because you don't really want to know. At the end of the day, you're locked up in your house, you are insulated, it's a little jail.
My question is, if we know this crime is so pervasive, so infectious, it could lead to psychological, physical, social, all kinds of trauma.
Everything, yeah.
Why is this happening? Why is this happening across the nation?
Yeah.
You know, so if we know why it is happening, we could then address it. I mean, people have spoken about maybe it comes from the gene, but that's only partly true.
Well,
but the environmental stimuli is probably much more. So if we could identify what are some of the stimuli in the environment that trigger enough people to just take up a gun, or for me, seeing a child on the road there and not go to assist, because I am thinking, well, look, maybe Rebecca might pass later and collect the child. Maybe I'm too busy now, and each person saying the other person might do it. What is really the reason? Is that people taking it for a big joke, like a game? If I kick you up, oh, well, I'm going to take a chance and give you a next kick as well, and make it more traumatic as a sport? Is it because we really feel that we need to damage somebody because of he being violated me at some previous point in time out of vengeance? My question to the panel here, what is it in society that triggering this effect for crime to be so contagious across this nation and it's increasing daily? Because if we know that, then we can have an appropriate intervention to be able to deal with it.
But that's a simple way of looking at it, because you have, just as much as you have three of us here, each one of us is going to give you a different answer. As an economist, I will say, well, we don't have equitable systems. You don't have an ample opportunity for people to get employment, and therefore the other thing that they look towards is that quick fix. The medical doctor might be saying that there are some deep mental health issues that we need as a society to deal with. The political science.
That kind of way, because I feel each one of these reasons is relevant at different points in time. Whether I say because not even though we have a myriad of things that may be,
and all are correct,
but for that particular person, he may find it because of poverty, and therefore we go to him to address poverty. Just like in a school, I think somebody commented in these primary school, we need to have a better grouping of students so they wouldn't all fail at the end of the 3 or 5 years of secondary school. So it's not one cap fits everything. So, but what you say is absolutely true. Economics might be a reason.
And then we're dealing with it, and what we need to do is as a society move away from dealing with things in silos, because you see and you mentally divorce, for example, violence in schools not as precursors to major crimes later on, and then you deal with crimes later on, in the sense that of course there's a link. And we need as a society to understand the multifaceted nature of the beast that is development that we are dealing with, and ensure that in addressing crime, that the value chain of it at the level of the home in terms of poverty and everything else, at the level of the home dealing with unemployment and underrepresentation and access to resources, and then bullying in schools, so, and then everything else.
Is our nation really up to this task to look at these multidimensional areas that we need to address, especially if you have areas that seem to be more, well, the whole country seems to be high risk now. I don't know if it could only be in North Trinidad or Central, because the whole country seems to be getting this problem.
It's an agitation.
So therefore, is our country prepared to deal with it? Because if we're not prepared to deal with it, and I was thinking of like Mr. Hines, when he said that this rape victim, some victims are profiteering from that type of
encounter.
And I found that as a Minister of National Security, that statement itself shows a lack of understanding of what crime is about. Because, you know what I mean, if you say in that statement, How you expect a crime victim to feel?
You see, this is where we have a real challenge. And this is where we have to talk about our democracy. Because we
Yes.
talk about democracy and everybody have rights.
Yeah.
And we try to protect each and everybody's rights. But then there's that question. To what extent does my right give way to your right? Or, put it differently, I mean, you go back to Aristotle and Socrates and those old-time political philosophers, and we ask them, and we say that there's supposed to be that social contract where the state has to provide certain things. But of course, the citizen has a role to play.
Yeah.
And the question is, are we ready and willing to play our role, our part in that process? Now, when we understand that from that perspective, the question that begs here is simply one which says, now, where are we going? You ask the question, are we ready as a country, ready and willing to deal with it? Then you have to ask that question probably from a different perspective. Is the leadership of the country ready and willing to deal with it? When, for instance, I mean, and I asked the question earlier, I think I got a no comment when I asked the question. But does our security forces engender within us that sense of security in our thinking, in our psyche? Do we feel safe? And the challenge with it is simply, if we don't feel safe, then what? What can we do? And if, for instance, those in charge are not giving us that kind of security or not doing things that we need to deal with, then we have a problem. So we have this kind of real challenge. Now we're fast running out of time.
Yeah.
So we need to kind of
Wrap
talk
up.
quickly as to how do we go from it.
At the end of the day, Dr. Raghunath, I think it's incumbent on us to always continue to reflect on where we are as a society and whether or not we have the foundations that will enable us to move forward. This year, Trinidad and Tobago turns 60 in terms of our independence profile, and it's really a good place for us to reflect as a nation how far we've come and where we want to be. Having a vision of where we want to be collectively is important, and then collectively, as you say, moving towards that vision. And I think really what we need is a cadre of leaders who can engender that visioning process and lead in thought and lead by virtue of that fortitude that you talked about, that grit, that legacy that came from our leaders in the past, the Eric Williams, those that went before us to push this nation into the space that we're in.
I want to see this thing done at 3 levels. One, at the community level, where we look at the public health model to look at different dimensions that have major gaps. The second thing, I want to see we spend some time on the Trinidad and Tobago police force or police service. Let us have a complete transformation in terms of thinking. I don't know how that has been done. They have it in the IHA where they have middle management training and so on, but I want to be able to see all police officers from recruitment right up to the commissioner of police. Let me talk to them and say, look, you know what, we have to try and get this correct, as we're going to have a failed criminal justice system. We already have a problem with the judiciary. That's a different story. But let me try as a group of people who have to carry this battle. Let me try and let me change ourselves and give them incentives. It don't have to be always monetary because we don't have no money. And the third thing, you see, people in charge, leaders, they have to be careful with what kind of statement they make. So we feel that extra. If you have a leader coming, and I remember, and he whistling, you see, but he going to operate on me, or he's going to be my boss, or you have a person who, as you reach in the work, you say, I ain't getting no food today, my wife quarreled with me. You want him to be your leader? If you have a next person, the third person, say, look, I know this country is in a state where we need to make a difference. So therefore, have no fear. But don't just say to it mouth, I'm going to introduce things with that kind of confidence, you know. So we want a leader like that.
So some of our
Don't just say it with mouth.
Some of our aspiring political leaders who are probably making a case for
Clearly.
some of them, right?
Yeah.
But the point about it here is simply one which is, and I hear you, Dr. Bahal, and I hear you, Dr. Boslan. The point about it here is simply one which says that we need to go forward. Now, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think I said it last week on the show, when we had the History Fest, I actually gave a paper on that, and I said that we need to move from building a state to building a nation. Because we got independence 60 years ago, and we put in place the mechanisms to build a state. But did we build a nation? And we are still very much so far from building a nation. Building a nation is that where we need that community, that solidarity, that trust,
Yes.
that respect, that tolerance.
Yeah.
And that's what we need.
Identity.
Identity. And that's what we need to build a nation.
From ground
And exactly. And when we talk about the politicians, this is where I think, I have a serious problem with our politicians, because our politicians are there to build their political organizations and to maintain power. I am concerned as to whether or not, to the extent to which they are concerned about building our nation. Yes, they are doing things, but we have to ask ourselves,
I am not sure if
Where
these
we
politicians are really
So-
genuinely for nation.
That's
so
a
we have to
conversation for next week.
we have to take up on these conversations, and we're going to have to probably talk about this next week.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Burning Issues today on IETV. Join us next week when we'll continue the conversation. But next week we definitely have to get Dr. Boslan to talk about the economics, because next week we'll have the mid-year
Budget
budget review.
review.
Good evening.